She built nothing. She is nothing. Claire Morgan said it loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. Then she laughed, sharp, bright, contemptuous, and looked directly at Olivia across the aisle with the open satisfaction of someone watching a person drown. The bailiff stiffened. Two attorneys looked at the floor. Nathan said nothing. He just straightened his tie. Olivia Bennett did not move, did not flinch, did not make a sound. She simply placed both hands flat on the folder in front of her, the folder no one in that room had asked about, and waited. 12 minutes later, Judge Eleanor Whitmore looked up from a document and asked one question. One. And Claire Morgan's world collapsed so completely, so publicly, so permanently that the laugh was still echoing in the room when it happened. If you've ever watched someone get dismissed, talked over, laughed at, and then watched them quietly prove every single person wrong, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning of the final divorce hearing, Olivia Bennett woke up at 5:45, the same time she had woken up every day for the past 16 years. She made coffee. She fed the cat a gray tabby named Newton that her son Marcus had begged for 3 years ago and promptly forgotten how to care for. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the October light come up over the rooftops of Brookline, Massachusetts, that soft early gray that turns gold before you notice it changing. She was calm. That was the thing people wouldn't understand later when they tried to piece the story together. They'd expect tears. They'd expect a woman on the edge of something. But Olivia Bennett had stopped crying about her marriage 7 months earlier, and what she felt now, standing at that window with her coffee going cold in her hands, was something much quieter and much more dangerous than grief. She felt ready. She dressed simply, a navy dress she'd owned for 3 years, small pearl earrings her mother had given her, flat shoes. She looked at herself in the mirror for exactly 4 seconds, picked up her briefcase, and walked out the door. Daniel Brooks was already waiting in his car outside the Middlesex County Courthouse when she arrived. He was not a flashy man. He drove a 6-year-old Volvo, wore suits that were clean but never quite pressed, and had a habit of chewing on the end of his pen when he was thinking hard about something. He was 52 years old. He had never lost a case that he believed in. He believed in this one. "How are you feeling?" he asked when she got in. "Quiet," she said. He nodded like that was exactly the right answer. "Good. Let them make noise. We're going to let them do all the talking." And then, he smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "And then the judge is going to ask a question, and the whole room is going to change." Olivia looked out the windshield at the courthouse steps. "Do you think he knows?" Daniel paused for just a moment before he answered. "I think Nathan Bennett has spent 15 years not reading the documents he signed, and I think that's the most expensive mistake a man can make." She didn't say anything to that. She just picked up her briefcase, opened the car door, and walked toward the building. Inside the courthouse, the hallways smelled the way courthouses always do, industrial cleaner and old paper, and something beneath it that is harder to name the particular weight of things being decided. Olivia walked through security, nodded to the clerk at the desk, who recognized her from the previous 2 hearings, and pushed open the door to courtroom 7. She saw Claire before she saw Nathan. That wasn't an accident. Claire had positioned herself where she could be seen. She was sitting in the gallery, not at the table, because she had no legal standing in the proceedings, a fact that Nathan's attorney had argued loudly and unsuccessfully, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than Olivia's monthly grocery bill, her dark hair blown out in a way that said she had been at a salon at some point that morning. She sat with her legs crossed and her shoulders back, and when Olivia walked in, Claire turned her head with the casual precision of someone who had rehearsed the motion. She looked Olivia up and down. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Olivia held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then looked away, not because she was intimidated, but because Claire wasn't worth the time. She took her seat at the plaintiff's table. Nathan was already at the defendant's table across the aisle. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal one he always wore to investor meetings, the one his assistant had told him once that he looked authoritative in. His attorney, a man named Gerald Prescott, who billed at $850 an hour and had the handshake of someone who wanted you to know that fact, was arranging documents with the focused energy of a man who assumed this would be over quickly. Nathan looked across at Olivia. She had expected him to look away, or to look smug, or to look the way he had looked the last time they'd been in the same room together, that particular flavor of impatience he'd developed in recent years, like her presence had become an inconvenience he was managing. He looked instead like he was trying to figure something out. She didn't give him anything to work with. She opened her folder and began to review her notes. Daniel slid into the seat beside her, unbuttoned his jacket, and placed his own folder on the table. "Prescott filed a supplemental motion this morning," he said quietly, trying to get the prenup re-entered as full and complete protection of Nathan's business holdings. And Judge Whitmore denied it, same as the last 2 times. He uncapped his pen. "He's getting desperate." "He's been getting desperate for 3 months," Olivia said. "He just doesn't know it yet." Daniel looked at her. "You really are calm." "I've been calm since October," she said. "That was the month I found out. I cried for 3 days, Daniel. I cried until I couldn't anymore, and then something happened." She looked at the folder in front of her. "I remembered who I was before I was his wife." Before Daniel could respond, the clerk called the room to order, and Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered from the side door. She was 60 years old with silver hair. She wore short and reading glasses. She pushed up onto her forehead when she wasn't using them. She had been on the family court bench for 19 years. She had heard every story. She had seen every play. She sat down, arranged her papers, and looked out at the room the way an experienced surgeon looks at an operating table, without drama, without sentiment, with complete and total command. "We're continuing this matter of Bennett versus Bennett," she said. "Mr. Prescott, you filed a supplemental motion this morning, which this court has already addressed. Is there anything else before we proceed?" Gerald Prescott stood. He was the kind of man who stood very straight when he stood as if altitude were a legal argument. "Your Honor, we simply want to reiterate for the record that the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties in good faith in Mr. Prescott." The judge's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. "I've read the prenuptial agreement. I've read it 3 times. We can discuss it when we reach that section of the proceedings. Please sit down." Prescott sat down. Claire in the gallery uncrossed and recrossed her legs. Nathan leaned over and said something to Prescott that Olivia couldn't hear. Prescott patted the air with one hand, a gesture that said, "Don't worry, I've got this," and Olivia almost felt sorry for Nathan in that moment. Almost. The first hour of the proceedings covered the logistics, the house, the cars, the savings accounts, Marcus's college fund, which both parties had agreed would remain untouched, and separately managed the smaller details of a life being divided on paper. Prescott spoke frequently and with great confidence. Daniel spoke rarely and with great precision. Olivia answered questions when asked clearly and without elaboration. Nathan answered questions when asked, and twice he looked over at Claire when he was finished, as if checking for approval. The second time he did it, Judge Whitmore noticed. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes moved briefly to the gallery and then back to the papers, and Olivia saw something shift almost imperceptibly in the set of the judge's jaw. The real battle everyone in the room understood was the company. Bennett Health Innovations had been incorporated 15 years ago. It was now valued at approximately $120 million. It employed 340 people. It had contracts with 17 hospital networks across the northeastern United States and had recently begun expanding into the Midwest. Its flagship product was a predictive AI platform that helped hospital administrators anticipate patient volume staffing needs and supply chain requirements with an accuracy rate that its competitors hadn't come close to matching. The press called it revolutionary. The press called Nathan Bennett a visionary. Nathan had over the past decade and a half come to believe both of those things. Prescott stood when they reached the business assets section, and his tone changed, became heavier, more deliberate, the verbal equivalent of a man putting his full weight behind a door. "Your Honor, Bennett Health Innovations is and has always been the sole professional creation of Nathan Bennett. My client conceived the company, he built it. He has been its CEO from the day it was founded. The prenuptial agreement clearly—" "I'll stop you there, Mr. Prescott." Judge Whitmore hadn't looked up from the document in her hand. "I want to ask a question, and I want to ask it of your client directly." The room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when something unexpected has entered them. Nathan sat up straighter. "Of course, Your Honor." The judge set the document down on her bench and looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. Mr. Bennett, I've been reviewing the original corporate formation documents for Bennett Health Innovations, the articles of incorporation filed with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in September 15 years ago. She paused. Can you explain to me why the original shareholder agreement lists Olivia Bennett as the majority owner of the company? The silence that followed was of a different quality entirely. It was the kind of silence that happens when the air changes. Nathan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Gerald Prescott reached into his folder with the sudden urgency of a man who has just realized he might have missed something very important. Papers rustled. Someone in the gallery coughed. A bailiff near the door shifted his weight. Claire Morgan sat perfectly still. "Mr. Bennett," Judge Whitmore said again, her voice carrying the patience of someone who had all day. "The shareholder agreement. Nathan Bennett 48%, Olivia Bennett 52%. Can you explain the basis for that distribution?" Nathan turned to Prescott. Prescott was reading. His face had taken on a particular careful blankness that experienced courtroom observers would recognize as the expression of a man who had just discovered a very large problem. "Your Honor," Prescott said slowly, "I'd like to request a brief recess to— The documents have been in my possession since last week, Mr. Prescott. They were produced in discovery." The judge looked at him steadily. "I'll ask again. The 52%. What was the basis?" Daniel Brooks, sitting beside Olivia, had not moved. He had not reached for his folder. He had not leaned forward. He simply sat with his hands flat on the table and waited the way a man waits when he already knows what the answer is going to be, and he is simply allowing the room to catch up. Olivia looked at the folder in front of her. She thought about a small apartment in Cambridge 15 years ago. She thought about the particular quality of the light from her laptop screen at 2 in the morning, the empty coffee cups, the notebooks filled with her own handwriting page after page of algorithms and system architectures, and a problem she had decided she was going to solve if it took everything she had. She thought about Nathan sitting on the couch behind her watching basketball while she built the thing that would make him famous. She thought about all of it, and she felt something that was not anger and not triumph. She felt simply true. Nathan was speaking now, and his voice had lost the particular confidence it had walked into the room with. There were initial IP contributions, Your Honor, when the company was founded. Olivia had some technical contributions in the early stages, but those were— Mr. Bennett. The judge's voice was not unkind, but it was definitive. "I have the shareholder agreement. I have the IP assignment documentation. I have the original patent applications, which list your wife as lead inventor on all 4 of the core technology patents on which your company's platform is built." She set down her glasses and looked at him directly. This is not a minor detail. In the gallery, Claire Morgan had uncrossed her legs. She was sitting very still now, both feet flat on the floor, and the smile that had been on her face since she walked into the building was gone. In its place was an expression that was harder to name, something between disbelief and the first cold edge of understanding. She looked at Olivia. Olivia did not look back. The next 20 minutes would be, as anyone who was in that courtroom would say later, among the most uncomfortable 20 minutes they had witnessed in a legal proceeding. Gerald Prescott requested a recess and was denied. He requested time to review additional documentation and was told the documentation had been available for 6 days. He attempted 3 separate lines of argument about the nature of the prenuptial agreement, and each time was redirected by Judge Whitmore to the foundational question of ownership. Because the prenuptial agreement carefully crafted and very expensive protected Nathan Bennett's business assets. The significant $120 million problem, was that it protected Nathan Bennett's business assets. And the original corporate documents were quite clear about which business assets actually belonged to Nathan Bennett. Nathan finally turned in his chair and looked at Olivia directly. It was the first time he had really looked at her since the hearing began. His face was not the face of a CEO. It was not the face of a visionary. It was the face of a man who had told himself a story for so long he had stopped checking whether it was true, and who had just discovered in the worst possible public way that it wasn't. "Olivia," he said. Her name in his mouth said that way, with that particular helplessness. After 16 years, she knew every way he could say her name. She knew this one. "Don't," she said quietly. Not cold, just clear. Daniel put his hand briefly on the table beside her arm, not touching just present, and turned back toward the bench. "Your Honor," he said, I'd like to speak to the IP assignment documentation if the court is ready. The judge nodded. Please proceed, Mr. Brooks. Thank you. He opened his folder with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had been waiting a long time for this moment and intended to make it count. 15 years ago, when Bennett Health Innovations was incorporated, my client Olivia Bennett contributed 4 proprietary software systems to the company. Those systems formed the core architecture of what is now the company's flagship predictive analytics platform. In exchange for that contribution, she received 52% of the company's equity, which is documented in the original shareholder agreement. The contribution is further documented in an IP assignment agreement dated the same week as the incorporation. The assignment agreement was reviewed by the company's initial legal counsel, signed by both parties, and has been on file with the company's registered agent continuously since that date. He paused. The prenuptial agreement, as this court has noted, refers to Nathan Bennett's business holdings. At the time of signing and at all subsequent times, Nathan Bennett held 48% of Bennett Health Innovations. That is and has always been the extent of his business holdings in this company. Daniel closed his folder. My client has never needed the prenuptial agreement to protect her interest in the company because her interest in the company was never in dispute. She owns 52%. She has always owned 52%. That is a matter of corporate record, not a matter of divorce proceedings. The silence that followed was long enough to have weight. Judge Whitmore looked at the documents in front of her. She looked at Nathan. She looked at Prescott. She looked at Daniel. Then she looked at Olivia. Mrs. Bennett, she said, or I understand you may be resuming your prior name, Ms. Olivia. Bennett is fine for now, Your Honor, Olivia said. The judge allowed herself the smallest possible nod. The court will take a brief recess to review the documentation thoroughly. We will reconvene in 45 minutes. She stood and everyone in the room stood with her, and she walked out through the side door, and the moment the door closed, the room erupted. Nathan turned on Prescott. His voice was low, but Olivia could hear the edge in it from across the aisle. How did you miss this 8 months of preparation and you missed this? Prescott was already on his phone. I need to make a call. The discovery documents were 1,700 pages of corporate records. Nathan, we need to discuss strategy. There is no strategy. Nathan's voice cracked on the last word. She owns the majority. She owns the majority of the company I've run for 15 years. Keep your voice down, Prescott hissed. In the gallery, Claire had stood. She was looking at the back of Nathan's head with an expression Olivia from across the room couldn't fully read. But she could read the body language, the slight backward lean, the hands that didn't know where to go, the particular quality of a person who had stepped onto a surface they believed was solid and discovered it was not. A paralegal from Prescott's office hurried in through the back door with a laptop and started whispering urgently to the attorney. Olivia turned to Daniel. You okay? He asked. She thought about the question. I'm better than okay, she said. I'm exactly where I thought I'd be. How long have you known about the shares? I've always known, she said. I was there when we signed the papers. I helped draft them. She looked at the plaintiff's table in front of her. But I spent a lot of years not thinking about it because it never seemed like it would matter. Because I thought we were partners. I thought we were doing this together. And when did you realize you needed to start thinking about it? She was quiet for a moment. The day I found the messages. I sat at my kitchen table and I read them, and Nathan was at work and the house was completely quiet, and I thought about everything I'd walked away from. My career, my patents, years of work that went into building something I stopped having any visible role in. I thought about all of it, and then I thought, wait. Her jaw set. I started reading paperwork that night. Daniel smiled at his folder. Good thing you kept the originals. The company's registered agent kept the originals, she said. I just knew to ask. He looked at her. Most people don't. Most people, she said, assume they're safe. The 45 minutes passed in a way that felt much longer. Nathan and Prescott huddled in a corner of the hallway, their conversation occasionally visible through the narrow window in the courtroom door. Nathan's gestures growing larger and more frustrated as Prescott's grew more careful and contained. 2 members of Prescott's team came and went with files. A phone call happened that did not seem to go well. Claire sat back down in the gallery after a few minutes. She did not take out her phone, which she had been checking constantly before the recess. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the empty judge's bench. Olivia sat at the plaintiff's table and reviewed her notes and drank the cup of water Daniel had gotten her from the hallway fountain. She was not gloating. This was important to understand. There was no gloating in her, not even in the private space of her own chest. What was there was something more durable than gloating. A kind of fundamental settling, like tectonic plates reaching their correct position after a long, slow shift. She had not wanted this fight. She had wanted for most of her adult life to be exactly what she was: a scientist who loved her work, a mother who loved her son, a woman who had been genuinely happy in her marriage for a long time before it stopped being true. She had not wanted to be the majority shareholder of a company by default, because her husband had decided she was decorative. She had not wanted to be the woman who had to sit in a courtroom and prove that she had value. But here they were. And if they were going to be here, she was going to tell the truth, the full truth, all 52% of it. When Judge Whitmore returned and the room came back to order, Prescott made one more attempt, a carefully worded argument about the distinction between corporate ownership and marital assets, about the way the prenuptial agreement had been understood by both parties at the time of signing, about Nathan's central and operational role in building the company's success. Judge Whitmore listened to all of it. Then she said, "Mr. Prescott, I understand your argument. The problem with your argument is that it doesn't engage with the foundational legal reality, which is that your client has never owned a majority of this company. He has managed it, he has led it, he may have made significant contributions to its growth. But majority ownership has resided with Mrs. Bennett continuously since the company's founding, and that ownership is protected by corporate law, not subject to the terms of the prenuptial agreement, and not before this court to adjudicate." She looked down at her papers. "What is before this court is the equitable distribution of your client's 48% minority stake, along with the other marital assets we've been discussing today." Nathan's face had gone through several colors in the past 45 minutes. It had landed somewhere between pale and gray. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "given the scope of my client's intellectual contributions to the company, which are documented extensively in the patents and IP assignment agreements entered into evidence, Mr. Brooks has filed a motion for equitable compensation for those contributions, as they relate to the appreciation of Nathan Bennett's 48% over the course of the marriage. I'm inclined to take that seriously. We'll schedule a separate hearing to address that question." Prescott stood. "Your Honor." "That's all for today, Mr. Prescott." She was already making notes. "We'll continue this matter in 3 weeks." The gavel came down, and in the gallery, Claire Morgan sat very still and said nothing, and the expensive blazer and the blown-out hair and the confident posture were all still there technically, but something underneath them was different now, like a building that looks the same from the outside but has had something structural removed. Olivia packed her folder. Daniel was quiet beside her, letting her have the moment. She looked across the aisle. Nathan was sitting very still, staring at the table in front of him. The stack of documents Prescott had prepared, the careful, elaborate structure built to protect what he believed was his, sat beside his hand, and he wasn't touching it. After a moment, his eyes moved up, and he found her looking at him. He opened his mouth. She picked up her briefcase. 16 years, Nathan," she said. Her voice was not loud. It was not cruel. It was simply what it was, the voice of a woman who has said what needed to be said and knows there is nothing left to add. 16 years I was in that house building something. You just kept forgetting to look at what it was." She walked out. In the hallway, she stopped by the water fountain and took a long, slow breath and looked up at the fluorescent ceiling of the Middlesex County Courthouse, and for a moment, just a moment, her eyes went bright and full. But she didn't cry. She exhaled instead, and she kept walking. Behind her, through this door of courtroom 7, she could hear Nathan's voice starting up again, low and urgent, and Prescott's careful, controlled response. And somewhere beyond that, the precise and particular silence of a woman who had thought she was watching someone else's defeat, discovering that the floor had shifted beneath her feet. Olivia pushed open the main door of the courthouse and stepped into the October light. It was gold now. She had known it would be. The 45-minute recess felt like a lifetime to everyone except Olivia. She sat at the plaintiff's table while the rest of the room scrambled, and she thought about a Tuesday night 15 years ago when she had not slept at all. Not because she couldn't, because she wouldn't. because she had been 48 hours away from solving a problem that had been eating at her for 3 months, and sleep felt like a betrayal of the answer that was almost within reach. Nathan had come into the kitchen at 2 in the morning, bleary-eyed looking for water, and found her surrounded by notebooks and empty coffee cups and 3 open laptops running simultaneous simulations. "Livy," he'd said, "come to bed." "Not yet," she'd said. "You've been up since yesterday." "I know." He had stood there for a moment looking at her, the way he used to look at her back then, with something that was partly admiration and partly the helpless frustration of a man who could see that his wife was somewhere he couldn't follow. Then he'd kissed the top of her head, refilled her coffee without being asked, and gone back to bed. 3 hours later, she had cracked it. The predictive model that would become the core of Bennett Health Innovations platform, the algorithm that learned patient intake patterns across hundreds of variables and projected hospital resource needs with an accuracy no competitor had matched, had been born in that kitchen in the dark while Nathan slept. She had thought about that night a lot over the past 7 months. She thought about it now as the recess ticked by, and she watched Gerald Prescott make his 3rd urgent phone call in the hallway, his voice low and fast, one hand pressed flat against the wall beside him, like he needed the support. Daniel came back from the water fountain and sat down beside her. Prescott's firm just pulled 3 additional associates. They're trying to reconstruct the corporate history from their end. "They'll find the same thing we found," Olivia said. "They will," Daniel agreed. "The question is whether they'll try to argue around it. Can they?" He considered this with the careful honesty that she had come to rely on over the past 8 months of working with him. "No," he said. "Not successfully. The IP assignment is airtight. Your patents are on record with the USPTO. The shareholder agreement was properly executed and has been continuously maintained. There's no ambiguity here, Olivia. There never was." He paused. "The only question now is how much damage Nathan did to his own position by spending 15 years acting like the majority owner of something he didn't own." She looked at her folder. "How much damage did he do?" Daniel's expression was carefully neutral. "We'll discuss that in the next hearing. But I'll tell you this, the fiduciary questions alone are significant." She nodded slowly. "He made decisions about my company for 15 years without consulting me." "He made decisions about his company," Daniel said. "That's what he believed, and believing it genuinely doesn't make it legal." The courtroom door opened and Nathan came back in. He walked past the plaintiff's table without looking at Olivia, and she watched him, the way you watch someone you used to know very well and are now seeing clearly for the first time, the way distance, once it exists, makes the familiar suddenly strange. He sat down heavily. Prescott came in a moment later, leaned close, and spoke into his ear for 30 seconds. Nathan's jaw tightened, released, tightened again. Claire slipped back into the gallery. She did not look at Olivia when she sat down. She looked at Nathan, and whatever she saw in the set of his shoulders made something in her face go very still. The gavel came down, and the second act of the most expensive Tuesday of Nathan Bennett's life began. What happened in those next 2 hours in courtroom 7 was on the surface a legal proceeding. Documents were entered, arguments were made. The judge asked questions and received answers and made notes in the careful, methodical way of someone who is building something precise and isn't going to rush it. But underneath the surface, something else was happening. A story was being told. The real one. The one Nathan had never told the press. Daniel Brooks told it quietly without theater, the way the best storytellers do, by simply presenting the facts in the order they occurred and allowing the shape of them to speak. 15 years ago, he explained, Olivia Reyes, not yet. Bennett was a 33-year-old AI engineer at a healthcare technology firm in Boston. She had spent 4 years building expertise in predictive modeling systems, specifically in the application of machine learning to operational efficiency in hospital settings. She had published 2 papers. She had 3 pending patents. She was by any reasonable measure one of the more talented engineers working in her specific intersection of fields. Nathan Bennett at 37 was a former pharmaceutical sales representative with an MBA and a gift for relationships. He had an idea, a genuine one, a good one for a company that would use technology to help hospitals run better. He could see the market. He could see the opportunity. What he could not do was build the technology. They met at a conference in Chicago. They were married 14 months later. And in the 9 months between the wedding and the company's founding, Olivia had built the thing that Nathan had envisioned. She had built it in evenings and weekends and early mornings while working her full-time job. She had built it in the margins of a new marriage and a new life and a future she was investing in with everything she had. She had built 4 core systems, filed 4 patents with her name as lead inventor, and when the company was incorporated, she had contributed all 4 to the new entity in exchange for 52% of the equity. Nathan had contributed his sales relationships, his investor network, and his operational vision in exchange for 48. It had seemed fair to both of them at the time. It had been fair. Judge Whitmore listened to all of this without interrupting. Prescott interrupted 4 times. He was overruled 4 times. His objections grew slightly less confident with each one. Nathan sat very still. In the gallery, Claire was doing something she had not done at any prior point in the proceedings. She was listening, genuinely listening the way you listen when you realize the story being told is not the story you were given. Because here was the thing about Claire Morgan that the tabloids would get wrong later, when the story inevitably became public. She was not stupid. She had never been stupid. She was ambitious, and she was ruthless, and she had made choices that had hurt real people, but she had a sharp mind, and that sharp mind was now processing the information being laid out in Courtroom 7 with the cold efficiency of a system encountering data that did not match its prior inputs. She had genuinely believed that Nathan was what he said he was, a visionary, a builder, a man who had created something real. She had believed that Olivia was what she appeared to be, a woman who had stepped back from the company when the children came, who had chosen a quieter life, who had essentially traded her professional identity for domestic comfort, and was now paying the price for that choice. Claire had built her entire sense of victory on that story. And she was sitting in a courtroom, watching a very careful attorney dismantle it document by document. She thought about the things Nathan had told her about Olivia. She was a support system, he'd said once. She helped in the early days. But the real work, the company you see today, that was me. That was 15 years of my decisions. Claire had believed him. She thought about her own voice over 18 months of conversations she could not now take back. "You built this without her," she'd said to him once in his kitchen. Olivia's kitchen, though she hadn't thought about it that way, with a glass of wine in her hand and the certainty of someone who has decided what the story is. Everything she's claiming credit for you could have gotten anywhere without her. You are the company. Nathan had smiled. He'd put down his own glass and looked at her with the particular warmth of a man receiving exactly the validation he wants, and said, "You're the only person who really sees that." She had felt so certain. She thought about that now. She thought about the patents on the screen at the front of Courtroom 7. 4 patents, Olivia's name, lead inventor each one. She thought about the product that had made Nathan famous. She thought about the algorithm she had heard him describe at industry conferences, his voice taking on the warm authority of a man explaining his own creation. And she thought, how many times did he say, "I built," when he meant, "she built"? She pressed her lips together. The hearing continued. Daniel walked through the patent record methodically. Patent 1 filed 16 years ago, provisional application, Olivia Reyes as sole inventor. Patent 2 filed the same year, joint application, Olivia Reyes as lead inventor, Nathan Bennett as secondary. Patent 3 filed 1 year before incorporation, Olivia Reyes as sole inventor. Patent 4, the one that became the flagship product's core engine, filed 8 months before the company opened its doors. Olivia Reyes, lead inventor. "Mr. Prescott," the judge said at one point, "your client is listed as secondary inventor on one of the 4 patents and not listed at all on the other 3. What is your position on the nature of his intellectual contribution?" Prescott's answer took 4 minutes and 40 seconds and ultimately said very little. The judge made a note. Nathan turned to Prescott and said something sharp and quiet. Prescott said something back, and his tone had the careful flatness of a professional managing a client who is panicking, and that flatness itself was a kind of answer. Then something happened that no one in the room anticipated. Nathan stood up, not at an appropriate moment, not when the judge had addressed him. He simply stood the way a man stands when something has gotten too large to stay seated through and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to speak." The room froze. Prescott reached up and grabbed his client's arm. "Nathan, I'd like to speak." His voice was not loud, but it had a quality that silenced people, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to, deployed now without its usual confidence, which made it stranger and more desperate. I need to say something. Judge Whitmore looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Mr. Bennett, your attorney. I understand my attorney's position. He did not look at Prescott. He looked at the judge. I understand the documents. I understand what they say. He stopped. His throat worked. I just want the record to reflect that I know. I know what she built. I know what those patents are worth. I've known for 15 years. His voice didn't break, but it bent. Somewhere along the way, I started telling a different story. And the story got bigger than the truth. And I kept telling it because... He stopped again. Because the truth was that she was better at the technical work than I'd ever be, and I was supposed to be the visionary, and it was easier to... Mr. Bennett. Prescott was on his feet. I strongly advise... I know. Nathan sat back down. He put his hands flat on the table. I know. I'm done. The courtroom was so quiet that Olivia could hear the ventilation system. She was looking at the table in front of her. She was not going to cry. She knew herself well enough to know the difference between tears and the thing she was feeling right now, which was older and more complicated than tears. It was the feeling of having been seen finally by the one person whose failure to see her had mattered most. Too late, but true. And she had learned in the past 7 months to hold both of those things at once. Daniel put his hand briefly on the table beside her. She didn't look at him. I know, she said quietly. I'm fine. I know you are, he said. Judge Whitmore had been making notes throughout Nathan's statement. She looked up now and surveyed the room with the practiced composure of a woman who has seen men break in her courtroom before and has learned to let them, because the breaking is often where the truth lives. We'll take a brief recess, she said. 15 minutes. The gavel came down. And in the gallery, Claire Morgan stood up, and for the first time since the hearing began, she walked out of the room. Not with the careful, deliberate stride she'd walked in with. Something faster, something that was working hard not to look like what it was. Olivia noticed. She noticed the way you notice everything when you have spent the better part of a year training yourself to pay attention to what is actually happening rather than what you're being told. She did not say anything. She picked up her water cup and drank and looked at the empty judge's bench and thought about what Daniel had said to her in his office 6 months ago when she had first brought him the corporate documents. She had sat down across from his cluttered desk and put the folder in front of him without saying anything, and he had opened it, and she had watched his eyes move across the first page and then the second, and then he had looked up at her and said simply, "Where did you find this?" "My own filing cabinet," she said. "I kept copies of everything we signed." He looked back at the folder. "And Nathan, does he know these still exist?" "I don't think he ever thought about them," she said. "I don't think he's thought about those documents in 15 years. He moved past them. He built his version of the story, and he moved past the paperwork." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "People do that," he said. "They decide what the story is, and they stop looking at the evidence." "He stopped looking at me," she said. "At some point, I just became part of the furniture, the wife, the mother, the woman who used to do something technical a long time ago before the real company existed." She looked at her hands. "He forgot I was there when it started." "But you weren't just there," Daniel said. He looked at her steadily. "You built the foundation. Every dollar that company is worth today is standing on something you created." "I know," she said. "Do you—" I wasn't asking to be harsh. He was asking like a man who had seen too many people undervalue what they had created. "Because I want to make sure you know that going into this, Olivia, not just intellectually, I want you to walk into that courtroom knowing it in your bones." She had looked at him for a long moment. "I know it," she said. "I've always known it. I just spent a long time not saying it out loud." She thought about that conversation now in the 15-minute recess, as the room settled and reorganized itself around the new shape of what everyone had just heard. She thought about how strange it is the way women are trained to know their own value quietly, to hold it privately, to let other people take up the space while they manage the substance, to be the thing behind the thing invisible and essential, and to call that humility, when sometimes it was just the path of least resistance through a world that rewarded men for claiming and women for deferring. She had deferred for a long time. She was done deferring. When the recess ended and Judge Whitmore returned the room, that reassembled itself was noticeably different from the one that had convened 3 hours earlier. Prescott's team had lost the particular forward-leaning energy of people who believe they are winning. Nathan sat with a stillness that was different from confidence. It was the stillness of a man who has run out of narrative. Daniel was exactly as he had been all morning, unhurried, precise, present. And Claire was back in her seat in the gallery. She had come back. Olivia had wondered if she would. She had. She sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes forward, and the expensive blazer was still on and the hair was still perfect, and the surface of Claire Morgan remained exactly as constructed. But something underneath it had changed, and Olivia, who had spent 16 years reading the people she loved best, could see it the way you see a crack in something, not the crack itself, but the shadow it throws. The judge addressed the room. "Before we continue," she said, "I want to be direct about where this proceeding stands. The question of majority ownership of Bennett Health Innovations is not before this court to decide. It has been decided by corporate documents properly executed 15 years ago, maintained continuously, and now entered into this record. 52% of that company belongs to Mrs. Bennett, and that ownership is not a marital asset subject to division. It is a prior property right." She looked at Prescott. "What is subject to these proceedings is Mr. Bennett's 48% minority stake, and the question of how that stake is to be fairly distributed given the context of this marriage. Additionally, as Mr. Brooks has raised, there are questions of fiduciary responsibility that may require separate proceedings. I'm not ruling on those today, but I want all parties to understand that this court is not going to pretend the last 4 hours didn't happen." Prescott stood carefully. "Your Honor, we'd like to request a continuance to allow our team to fully review." "Denied," she said. "We're going to continue today with the assets I listed this morning. We'll schedule a follow-on hearing for the business-related questions within the next 30 days. Nathan looked at Olivia. She looked back. And this time, he didn't try to say anything, because there was nothing left to say that would change what was on paper. What was on paper had been true for 15 years. What was on paper had survived his rebranding of the story, survived her years of quiet domesticity, survived the press coverage and the investor meetings and the TED Talk he had given 2 years ago, where he had used the word "I" 47 times in 18 minutes. What was on paper had waited filed in a cabinet at a registered agent's office in downtown Boston, patient and exact, the way the truth tends to wait. In the gallery, Claire Morgan sat and listened to the rest of the hearing with the focused stillness of a woman reconstructing something in her mind, going back through conversations, mapping what she'd been told against what was in this room, identifying the places where the story had been handed to her pre-shaped, and she had accepted it without pulling at the edges. She thought about the night 8 months into her relationship with Nathan when Olivia had called. She hadn't spoken to Olivia directly. Nathan had taken the call in the other room, and she had heard his voice go flat and clipped, the way it always did when Olivia's name came up. And when he came back, he had said, "She wants to meet with her attorney again. She's making this complicated." And Claire had said, "She's just trying to get what she can. She was never really in it for the company." And Nathan had looked at her with that particular gratitude she had mistaken for love and said, "Exactly, you get it. You always get it." She had been so sure she got it. She thought about what it meant to have been so sure of a story that you never questioned the source. She thought about the documents on the screen. She thought about the number, 52%. The hearing concluded 2 hours later with a schedule established orders entered regarding the house and the liquid assets, and an agreement reluctant on Prescott's part, carefully worded to proceed to the secondary hearing on business questions within the month. As people began to rise and gather their things, the ordinary sounds of a room returning to normal chairs, papers, low voices filled the air. Daniel leaned toward Olivia. "You know what happens next, right?" "He'll try to negotiate," she said. "He'll try to negotiate," Daniel confirmed. "Prescott will call me within 48 hours. He'll want to settle the business questions quietly out of court." "And what will you tell him?" Daniel picked up his folder. "I'll tell him we're listening, and then I'll listen. And then I'll tell you what they offered, and you'll decide what you want." "What do I want?" she said. It was not really a question to him. It was something she was saying out loud to hear the shape of it. "You want the truth on the record," he said. "You want the company protected. And I think," he paused, "you want to go back to work." She was quiet for a moment. 15 years. The work she had walked away from, the work she had set down carefully and covered over with everything else. She had poured herself into the work that had never really stopped living in her. It had just been waiting too, alongside the documents. "Yes," she said. "I want to go back to work." She stood, picked up her briefcase, and turned toward the door. Nathan was still at the other table, Prescott beside him. They were speaking in low voices, and Nathan had the particular hunched energy of a man absorbing something difficult and trying not to show how difficult it is. Claire was standing in the gallery aisle, pulling on her coat. Their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. Claire's face held something that was not quite an apology and not quite an acknowledgement, but was not. Olivia noticed the contempt it had carried that morning. Whatever word belongs to the expression of someone who has realized they were given the wrong map and only now understands how far in the wrong direction they traveled, that was what Claire's face held. Olivia did not give her the absolution she had not asked for. She did not give her anything. She just looked at her for one moment, clear, steady, unhurried, and then walked past her toward the door. Behind her, she heard Nathan say her name again. Olivia. She pushed open the door. The hallway received her, bright and ordinary, full of people moving through their own days toward their own destinations. Somewhere in the building, a phone was ringing. Somewhere a door opened. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead the same way they had hummed that morning. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. And while she waited, she thought about the kitchen. Her kitchen, the one she would need to leave, the one that held 15 years of ordinary mornings, the one where she had refilled her own coffee cup in the dark and solved the problem that had made Nathan Bennett a famous man. She thought, "I'll find another kitchen." She thought, "I already know how to work in the dark." The elevator opened. She got in. And as the doors closed, she caught her own reflection in the steel panel, navy dress, flat shoes, briefcase, the particular kind of calm that only comes from having nothing left to pretend, and she held her own gaze for a moment. And she thought, there you are. Prescott called Daniel at 8:47 the following morning. Daniel was in his car, halfway through a cup of coffee, and 5 minutes from his office when his phone rang. He looked at the name on the screen, set down the cup, and answered. "Gerald," he said. "Daniel." Prescott's voice had the careful, measured quality of a man who has spent the night recalibrating. "I think we should talk." "I think so too," Daniel said. "My office or yours?" There was a brief pause. "Neutral ground," Prescott said. "The Marriott on Boylston has a conference room." Daniel smiled at the windshield. A man who wanted to meet on neutral ground was a man who no longer felt safe on his own. "Tomorrow," he said, 10 o'clock. He called Olivia before he had even parked the car. She picked up on the second ring. She had been awake since 5:30, which meant she had probably been awake longer than that, and had simply decided 5:30 was the hour at which she was allowed to stop pretending she was sleeping. He knew this about her now. He had learned the rhythms of his clients, the way a doctor learns a patient's chart, not just what it said, but what it meant. "Prescott called," he said. A beat of silence. "Already, 8:47. "That's faster than I expected," she said. "It means they're scared," he said. "The fiduciary questions scared them. They spent last night running numbers and they figured out what we already knew." Which is what? Which is that a CEO who spent 15 years making unilateral decisions about a company he didn't majority own has exposure, significant exposure. And the board of Bennett Health is going to have questions the moment this becomes public record, which it will. Another beat. He could hear her breathing slow and deliberate, the way she breathed when she was thinking hard about something. "What do they want?" "I don't know yet. We're meeting tomorrow. But my guess?" He pulled into his parking spot and sat for a moment with the engine running. "They want to contain this. They want a private settlement that keeps the corporate governance questions out of public filings. They want this to stay a divorce and not become a shareholder dispute." "And what do I want it to be?" she said. It was the same question she had asked herself out loud in the courtroom the day before. He recognized it as something she did when the answer was forming, but wasn't ready yet. He had learned not to rush her. "That," he said, "is what we need to figure out before 10 o'clock tomorrow." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Daniel, the board, do they know yet about the shares?" "The corporate documents are public record as of yesterday," he said. "If any of them have an attorney on retainer, and they all do, they know by now." Another silence. Longer this time. He waited. "Then this isn't just a divorce anymore," she said. "No, he said. "It hasn't been just a divorce for about 24 hours." She exhaled. The sound of someone setting down a weight they've been carrying and picking up a different one. "Okay," she said. "I'll come to your office this afternoon. We need to go through everything." 2:00, he said. 2:00, she agreed. She hung up. And she stood in her kitchen, the kitchen she was going to have to give up that thought, still arriving in small, sharp bursts at odd moments. And she held the phone in both hands and thought about the board of directors of Bennett Health Innovations. 7 people. She knew all of them. 3 she had met when the company was still being formed. 2 had been recruited in the first 3 years. 1 was a woman named Judith Hale, who had been on the board for 9 years and who Olivia had always liked, a sharp, no-nonsense former hospital administrator who asked better questions at board meetings than anyone else in the room. Or so Nathan had complained once without quite realizing that was a compliment. She thought about Judith Hale reading the court filings this morning. She thought about the specific quality of attention a sharp woman pays when she realizes a story she has been told is incomplete. She allowed herself in the privacy of her own kitchen one small and private smile. Then she poured the rest of her coffee down the sink, put on her coat, and went to pick up her son from school before his first class, because she had promised him breakfast this week, and she was not going to be a woman who broke promises she made to her 14-year-old simply because the world had decided to rearrange itself. Marcus was waiting outside the school entrance, backpack over one shoulder, earbuds in doing the thing teenagers do, where they appear not to be looking for someone while looking for someone. When he saw her car, something in his posture shifted, almost imperceptible, the kind of shift only a parent sees, and he pulled out one earbud and got in. "You're on time," he said. "I told you I would be." "You also told me you were fine like 400 times last month, and you were clearly not fine." She looked at him. He was looking at the road ahead with the studied indifference of a teenager who has said something real and is now waiting to see if the adult will respond to the real thing or the surface of it. "I'm better now," she said. "Actually better, not just saying it." He was quiet for a moment. "I heard Dad called you last night." She kept her eyes on the road. "He did." "Did you talk to him?" "Briefly." "What did he say?" She considered how much of the truth 14 could hold and decided he could hold more than she usually gave him credit for. "He said he was sorry," she said. "He said he had gotten some things wrong." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. She could feel him processing this the way he processed everything carefully, privately, at a speed that looked like stillness, but wasn't. "Is that true?" he said. "That he got things wrong?" "Yes," she said. "And so did I. Not the same things. But nobody gets through 16 years without getting some things wrong." "You didn't cheat on him," Marcus said. The directness of it landed the way his directness always landed, without softening, because he had never learned to soften things, which was sometimes painful and always honest. "No," she said. "I didn't." "Then you didn't get the same things wrong," he said. She didn't have an answer for that. She reached over and briefly touched his arm, and he didn't pull away, which meant something specific in the vocabulary of 14-year-old boys and their mothers. They had breakfast at the diner 2 blocks from his school. She had eggs. He had an amount of pancakes that reminded her he was still, despite everything, a growing child with an appetite that defied explanation. They talked about his history project and a girl in his English class named Sophia who kept correcting his pronunciation of things she had no more authority over than he did. And by the end of it, some of the tightness in Olivia's chest had loosened the way it always loosened around him. She dropped him at school at 8:15 and drove to Daniel's office and spent 4 hours preparing for a meeting that was going to change the shape of everything. The Marriott conference room the following morning was the kind of neutral space that is specifically designed to make no one feel at home. Generic carpet, a long table, a credenza with water pitchers, and a coffee service that no one touched. Prescott arrived with 2 associates. Daniel arrived with Olivia. The moment she walked in, Prescott looked up and something shifted in his expression. He had expected Daniel. He had not quite expected Olivia. "Mrs. Bennett," he said with the careful courtesy of a man who has recalibrated his approach overnight. "Mr. Prescott," she said. She sat down across from him, folded her hands on the table, and said nothing else. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds, which in a conference room is a very long time. Prescott cleared his throat. "I appreciate everyone making time for this. I think it's in all parties' interests to explore whether there's a path to resolution that doesn't require extended litigation." Daniel nodded pleasantly. "We're listening." Prescott opened a folder with the careful deliberation of someone presenting something they have spent a long time constructing. My client is prepared to make a significant offer. In the interest of avoiding protracted proceedings and the associated impact on the company, he's prepared to transfer his full 48% stake in Bennett Health Innovations to Mrs. Bennett, relinquishing all claims to any share of the company in exchange for a clean settlement of all other marital assets on terms favorable to Mrs. Bennett and a mutual non-disparagement agreement. The room was quiet. Daniel looked at Olivia. She looked at Prescott. He's offering to give me shares I already have a majority over. He's offering to vacate the minority stake entirely, Prescott said carefully, making your ownership 100%. In exchange for, she said, not pursuing the fiduciary questions. Prescott's expression didn't change. In exchange for a full and final resolution of all matters. She looked at the water pitcher in the center of the table for a moment. Then she said, "Where is Nathan?" Prescott blinked. He felt it was best to have counsel represent. "I know what he felt," she said. "I'm asking where he is." A pause. "He's in the building," Prescott said. "He can be reached if—" "I want to talk to him," she said. "Not through attorneys, not through a document. I want to sit across from him and talk." She looked at Daniel. "Is there a reason that's not possible?" Daniel considered this. "It's unusual," he said, "but there's no legal barrier." She looked back at Prescott. "Get him." Prescott looked uncomfortable in the way of a man who has prepared extensively for one kind of meeting and is now in a different kind entirely. He reached for his phone, made a brief call, and 5 minutes later, Nathan Bennett walked into the conference room. He looked like he hadn't slept. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way, not haggard, not disheveled. Nathan had always been too controlled for dishevelment, but there was something behind his eyes that hadn't been there in years. Not in the boardroom, not on the stage at the TED conference, not at any of the 100 events where she had watched him perform the role of Nathan Bennett visionary. He looked real. She almost said so. She didn't. He sat down across from her beside Prescott and looked at her with the particular difficulty of a man who has rehearsed something and knows the rehearsal is inadequate. "Olivia," he said. "Nathan," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly. Not for the attorneys, not for the record." She held his gaze. "Why didn't you ever tell them—" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. The board, the press, anyone." She kept her voice even. "You knew what I built. You said so in that courtroom. You said you'd always known. So why—" He was quiet for a long moment. She let the silence sit. She had learned over years of technical work that the most important information usually lives in the pauses. "Because," he said slowly, "in the beginning, I told it the right way. I told investors we were co-founders. I talked about your technical background. I told the truth." He stopped. "But the story that worked, the story that got us the Series A, the story that made people want to meet with me was the story where I was the person who had built it. Not we, me." He looked at his hands. "And every time I told it that way, and it worked, it got easier to tell it again. And after a while you believed it," she said. He looked up. "Yeah. And I let you," she said. "That's what I've been sitting with Nathan. I let you. I stepped back and I took care of Marcus, and I let the story become the story because it was easier than fighting for a version of it that didn't make me the supporting character in my own company." He didn't say anything. "I'm done being the supporting character," she said. The silence in the room had a specific texture to it, now the texture of something that has been said that cannot be unsaid, that has changed the air pressure in a space. Prescott started to speak. Olivia raised one hand slightly, and he stopped. "I'm not going to sign a non-disparagement agreement," she said. "I'm not going to promise anyone that I won't tell the truth about what I built. What I will tell you is what I want, and then you can tell me whether we have a deal." Nathan looked at her. "I want the company," she said. "All of it. I want your 48% transferred cleanly, and I want your resignation as CEO effective within 90 days to allow a proper transition. I want the patents all four formally acknowledged as originating with my work. I want the corporate history corrected in any official filings that misrepresent the founding. And I want you to have enough to start over, whatever that looks like. I'm not trying to destroy you." She held his gaze. "But I'm done being invisible inside the thing I created." The room was very still. Nathan looked at her for a long time. Prescott was already making notes and very carefully not making eye contact with his client. One of Prescott's associates, a young woman with a notebook who had not spoken once in the meeting, had stopped writing and was sitting with her pen suspended above the page. Daniel Brooks sat with his hands folded and his face professionally neutral, but Olivia could see from 16 months of working with him the particular quality of his stillness when he was pleased. "Okay," Nathan said. Prescott looked up. "Nathan." "She's right," Nathan said. "She built it. We both know she built it. The least I can do is stop pretending otherwise." He looked at Olivia. "Okay." She nodded once, and that was it. 16 years, $120 million, 4 patents, 340 employees. A company that had lived in her mind and her hands before it had a name. "Okay." She stood. Daniel stood beside her. She picked up her briefcase. "One more thing," Nathan said. She stopped. "Marcus," he said, I need you to know that whatever happens with all of this, I'm still his father. I'm not going away." She looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said. "He knows. We've talked." She paused. "He's a good kid, Nathan. He didn't get that from the company." She walked out. In the elevator, Daniel let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "You knew he'd say okay." "I thought he might," she said. "What made you think that?" She watched the floor numbers change above the door. "Because he said it in the courtroom already. He said he'd always known. And I think part of him has been carrying that for a long time. The weight of the story that didn't match the truth." She paused. "It's exhausting carrying that." "I know. I carried my own version of it." The elevator opened. They walked through the lobby and out into the late October air, sharp and bright, and carrying the particular smell of the city-changing season. "What happens now?" Daniel said. "Now we draft the agreement," she said. "And then I called Judith Hale." He looked at her. "The board member. I need the board to understand what's happening before it becomes a headline," she said. "Judith will listen. She always asks the right questions." She stopped on the sidewalk and looked up for a moment at the sky, that cold blue that only happens in October in New England, the blue that is the most awake color in the world. "And then I need to go see the CTO, the current one." "Why?" "Because the platform has been running on the same core architecture I built 15 years ago," she said. "And I've been thinking about the next version for 10 years, and I have a lot of work to do." He smiled. "You're going back in." "I never really left," she said. "I just stopped being allowed to say so out loud." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out her phone. The moment she did, it buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. Short, no greeting, no sign-off. It said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know the real story. I should have asked." "See." She stared at it for a moment. Claire. She thought about the conference room, about the laughing in the courtroom, about 18 months of curated social media posts, Nathan and Claire at industry events, Nathan and Claire at charity dinners, the particular cruelty of a public relationship conducted as a performance for an audience that included unavoidably Olivia herself. She thought about Claire's face in the courtroom when Daniel laid out the patents, the exact moment the story had reconfigured itself behind Claire's eyes. She thought about what it means to have been lied to by someone you trusted, not because she had sympathy in excess for Claire Morgan, who had made her own choices, but because she understood more than she might have liked the specific quality of that disorientation, the way the floor moves when the map you've been holding turns out to be wrong. She looked at the text for a long moment. She did not respond. She put her phone in her pocket and looked at Daniel. "Let's get to work," she said. 2 weeks later, the settlement agreement was signed. Nathan's 48% transferred to Olivia. His resignation as CEO was tendered with a 90-day transition period. A joint statement carefully worded by both legal teams, every syllable negotiated, was released to the press, acknowledging Olivia's foundational role in the company's technology and her assumption of the majority shareholder position. The business press covered it. Of course they covered it. A $120 million company with a sudden ownership revelation was the kind of story that writes itself. The first wave of coverage focused on the corporate drama, the divorce, the courtroom, the share structure. The second wave, which came 3 days later and was larger, focused on the patents, 4 core patents, lead inventor Olivia Bennett. The third wave was different. The third wave was women. Women who worked in tech and healthcare and startups, built in apartments and kitchens and home offices. Women who had stepped back from companies they helped create. Women who had signed agreements they hadn't fully interrogated. Women who recognized themselves in the architecture of what had happened, the invisible founder, the wife who used to do something technical, the person who had created the foundation and watched someone else take credit for the building. They found Olivia's professional profiles. They wrote about her. They shared what Daniel had said in Courtroom 7 about the patents and the algorithms and the Tuesday night in the kitchen and what it means to build something real. She didn't feed any of it. She didn't post. She didn't give interviews. She had work to do, and the work was the answer to everything she wanted to say. But she was aware of it happening, the way you're aware of weather changing. Judith Hale called her on a Thursday morning 2 days after the settlement was signed. "I've been following this," Judith said without preamble. That was Judith's way. She had never wasted anyone's time in the 22 years Olivia had known her. "The board is meeting Monday. We need to discuss the CEO transition." "I know," Olivia said. "There are some on the board who want to bring in an external candidate, someone with name recognition in the field." "And what do you think?" Olivia said. A pause. "I think the person with the most knowledge of this company's core technology, the company's founding vision, and the company's future potential is currently in the process of getting a divorce and probably has 100 things on her plate." Another pause. "But I also think I've been sitting in board meetings for 9 years, watching Nathan take credit for something, and now I know where that something actually came from, and I'd very much like to have a conversation with its actual creator about what she thinks should happen next." Olivia sat down. She hadn't realized she was standing. "Judith, not asking you to be CEO," Judith said quickly. "Not yet. That's a conversation for later. I'm asking you to come in Monday. Come in as majority shareholder, sit at that table, and tell us where this company is supposed to go. Because Nathan's been telling us for 15 years, and now I want to hear the other version." Olivia held the phone and looked at the window. The other version. She had been sitting with the other version for 15 years. In the back of her mind, in the margins of her attention, in the hours after Marcus went to sleep, when she used to open her old notebooks and look at what she had built and think about what she would do differently now, what she would add. The architecture had advanced in 15 years, the field had advanced, the data had expanded, the computational resources were almost unrecognizable from what she'd had in that Cambridge apartment, and her mind had been working the problem quietly, steadily the whole time, like a background process, running continuously, waiting to be called. "Monday," she said. "What time?" 9 o'clock, Judith said. And Olivia, her voice shifted slightly. "Welcome back. I'm sorry it took this long." She hung up, and Olivia sat very still for a moment in the chair in the living room of the house she would soon stop living in the life she was in the process of ending and beginning simultaneously, and she let herself feel all of it at once. The grief that was still real, the anger that was fading, the fear that was small but present, and underneath all of it running stronger than any of them. Something she recognized as the specific aliveness of a person returning to the work they were always supposed to be doing. She thought about the Tuesday night 15 years ago, the kitchen, the coffee, the laptop screens, the problem that was almost solved. She thought, "I have another problem now, a bigger one, a better one." She reached for her notebook, the good one, the one she used for real thinking, not lists or logistics, but actual thinking, the kind that required space and silence and no performance for anyone. She opened it to a blank page. At the top she wrote one line, not a title, not a plan, just a question the way all real work begins. She wrote, "What does version 2 look like?" and she started to write. She wrote until the room got dark, and she had forgotten to turn on a light, and she kept writing in the near dark, the way she had always worked best, and Newton the cat climbed into the chair beside her and went to sleep. And outside the city carried on with its ordinary October evening, and inside in the particular silence of a woman who has finally been given back her own attention. Something that had been waiting for a very long time had begun. The Monday morning board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Olivia arrived at 8:45. She had not been inside the Bennett Health Innovations building in 4 years. Not since the last company anniversary dinner Nathan had asked her to attend as his wife standing beside him in a black dress while he gave a speech about vision and innovation and building something that mattered. And she had held a glass of champagne and smiled at the right moments and thought about the algorithm running in the company's servers 3 floors above her head that she had written in a Cambridge apartment before this building existed. 4 years. The lobby was different. Nathan had renovated twice since she'd last been here. New floors, new reception desk, the company logo on the wall behind the front desk in brushed steel letters 2 feet high. Bennett Health Innovations. She looked at her own last name on that wall and felt something complicated move through her that she did not try to name. The receptionist, young professional, clearly uncertain about the protocol for the situation. She was navigating, looked up when Olivia approached. "Mrs. Bennett," she said carefully. "Ms. Bennett is fine," Olivia said. "I'm here for the 9 o'clock board meeting." "Of course." The young woman reached for the phone. "I'll let them know." "That's all right," Olivia said. "I know the way." She did. She had been in every room of this building when it was still blueprints. She had walked the floor plan before there was a floor. She had sat in the architect's office with Nathan and pointed to the space that would become the server room and explained in terms the architect understood, but Nathan only partially followed why the cooling infrastructure needed to be primary, not secondary. She took the elevator to the 4th floor and walked down the hallway toward the boardroom, and she was aware as she walked of the particular quality of attention that moves through an office when something has shifted. People looked up from their desks. Some recognized her. Some recognized her name from the coverage of the past 2 weeks. Some simply sensed that the woman walking down the hallway with a briefcase and a specific kind of intention was someone who mattered in a way they hadn't yet been briefed on. She pushed open the boardroom door. 6 of the 7 board members were already seated. The 7th, a man named Robert Chu, who was perpetually late to everything and proud of it in the way of men who have decided their time is more valuable than other people's, was presumably on his way. Judith Hale was at the far end of the table, and when Olivia walked in, she stood a gesture so simple and so significant that the 3 board members nearest her immediately registered it and straightened in their chairs. "Olivia," Judith said. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for asking," Olivia said. She took the seat Judith had indicated midway down the table, not at the head. That chair, Nathan's chair for 15 years, sat conspicuously empty at the far end, and she set her briefcase down and looked around the table at the faces of the people who had been governing the company she built. She knew most of them. 4 she had met during the company's early years. 2 were newer appointments. All of them were looking at her with the specific attention of people who have recently received information that requires them to reassess something they thought they understood. Robert Chu came in, 3 minutes later saw Olivia, and stopped in the doorway for a half-second longer than was natural. Then he found his seat and said nothing, which was unusual enough for Robert Chu that 2 people noticed. Judith called the meeting to order. "I think we can dispense with the formalities this morning," she said, "given that everyone in this room has read the coverage of the past 2 weeks and is aware of the material changes to the company's ownership structure. What I'd like to do instead is give Olivia the floor. She has some things to say, and I think we should listen." She looked around the table. Any objection? No one objected. Olivia opened her briefcase. She had prepared for this the way she used to prepare for everything that mattered, not with talking points or a presentation deck, but with the thing itself, the actual substance, the real answer to the real question, organized clearly, ready to be examined. She set a single document on the table in front of her, 15 pages. She had not made copies for the board, which was a deliberate choice. She was not here to hand things to people. She was here to tell them something and then answer their questions and then decide together what happened next. "I want to start," she said, "not with what happened in the courtroom and not with the ownership documents because I assume you've all read those. I want to start with the technology." She looked around the table. "Because that's what this company is, and it's what I want to talk about." She talked for 35 minutes without interruption. She talked about the original platform, the architecture she had designed, the logic behind the predictive model, the specific choices she had made in the data structure that had allowed the system to scale far beyond what she had initially projected. She talked about what the system could do now. She talked about what it couldn't do, the limitations that had developed over time as the field advanced and the architecture hadn't kept pace, the places where competitors had found footholds in the gaps, the 3 specific capabilities that she knew hospital systems wanted and that Bennett Health wasn't currently delivering. And then she talked about version 2. She had been up until 1 in the morning, the notebook open beside her laptop, thinking about this. Not for the board, for herself. The board presentation was almost incidental. What she had actually been doing was thinking through the problem the way she always thought through problems from the inside out, starting with the fundamental question and following it wherever it went. She talked about it the way you talk about something you love, not performing passion, actually having it. And the room, which had begun with the polite attention of people in a meeting, shifted somewhere around the 20-minute mark into something different, the forward lean of people who are genuinely engaged, who have stopped thinking about the next thing they need to do and are actually present for this thing. Robert Chu, who had not said a word since he sat down, leaned forward with both elbows on the table and said, "What's the timeline on version 2 rough estimate?" 18 months to a functional prototype, she said. 36 to full deployment. That's with proper staffing and resources reallocated away from 3 projects that are currently absorbing budget for diminishing returns. Which 3 projects? Robert asked. She told him, precisely with numbers. He sat back. Nathan said those were priorities. They were priorities 3 years ago, she said. The market moved. The priorities didn't. A woman named Sandra Park, who had been on the board for 2 years and whose background was in healthcare systems administration, raised her hand slightly. Can you walk us through the competitive positioning? Because what I'm hearing you say is that the current platform has vulnerabilities we haven't been briefed on. That's what I'm saying, Olivia said. Yes. The room shifted again. Harder this time. Judith watched Olivia from the end of the table with the expression of a woman who had been waiting a long time for this specific conversation and was finding it exactly as necessary as she'd expected. They went on for another hour. Questions and answers, numbers and projections, the particular back and forth of people who are all trying to understand the same real thing at the same time. By the end of it, something had changed in the room in a way that was both subtle and total, the way a room changes when the actual person with the actual knowledge has entered it and started talking. When the formal meeting concluded, Judith asked 3 board members to stay. The others filed out, and Olivia noticed that several of them looked at her differently on the way out than they had on the way in. Not dramatically, but differently. Robert Chu stopped beside her chair. He was a man who had built 2 successful companies before joining this board, and he had a quality of directness that could be abrasive in social situations, but was... Olivia had always thought exactly the right quality for rooms like this one. "I owe you an apology," he said. No preamble, no softening. She looked at him. "For what specifically?" "For 9 years of board meetings where I asked Nathan questions about the technology and accepted answers that were clearly being filtered through someone who didn't actually understand it." He held her gaze. "I should have asked better questions." "Yes," she said, "you should have." He nodded, accepting this without defense. "I'm asking better ones now." He picked up his jacket. "The version 2 proposal. I want a formal presentation, with numbers." "Give me 2 weeks," she said. "You have 2 weeks," he said, and walked out. Judith closed the door behind him and turned to Olivia with the other 2 remaining board members, a man named Thomas Ellis and Sandra Park. "Okay," Judith said, "the real conversation." Olivia waited. "The CEO transition," Judith said. "Nathan's 90-day window starts Monday. We need a plan." She paused. "The board has been talking informally since the settlement was announced. There are different views. Thomas wants to recruit externally. I have a different view. Sandra is undecided." She looked at Olivia directly. "So I'm going to ask you directly, because you're the majority shareholder, and we're going to need your input regardless. What do you want?" Olivia was quiet for a moment. This was the question she had been sitting with since Judith's call. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to be honest about it. Honest with herself about the difference between what she wanted because it was right and what she wanted because 15 years of being invisible had built up a pressure that was looking for release. "I want what's best for the company," she said, "which I know sounds like a non-answer, so I'll be specific." She looked at Thomas Ellis. "I understand the argument for external recruitment. A new CEO brings fresh relationships, no internal politics, a clean slate. I understand it." She looked back at Judith. "But we are 18 months away from a version 2 prototype that could redefine our market position. An external CEO is going to spend the first 6 months learning the company. We don't have 6 months to spend on orientation." Thomas Ellis folded his hands. He was a methodical man, the kind who thought in complete sentences and wrote them down. "You're saying you want an internal candidate." "I'm saying we need someone who understands the technology well enough to lead the version 2 development without a learning curve," she said. "That's a specific requirement. It narrows the field considerably." "It narrows it to you," Sandra said quietly. The room went still. Olivia looked at Sandra. Sandra was not being provocative. She was being precise. It was one of the things Olivia respected about her. "That's not a decision I'm making unilaterally," Olivia said. "I'm the majority shareholder. I'm also a party to a divorce that just concluded in a way that is going to follow this company in the press for the next year. I have a potential perception problem." She paused. "What I'm saying is that the technology argument points in a specific direction. What you do with that argument is your call collectively. I'll support whatever structure the board decides on as long as the version 2 development gets the resources and attention it needs." Judith looked at her for a long moment. "You know what I notice," Judith said. "I've been in this boardroom for 9 years. Nathan used to answer questions like that by talking about himself for 4 minutes and then restating his original position. You just told us exactly what you think, why you think it, what your limitations are, and then gave us the decision." She looked at the other two. "That's the kind of answer this board has been missing." Thomas Ellis made a note. "I'll agree to delay the external search by 30 days. If the version 2 proposal is as strong as what I heard today, that changes the calculus." 30 days, Sandra said. She looked at Olivia. "Bring us something real." "I will," Olivia said. She left the building at 12:15. On the sidewalk outside, she called Daniel. "How did it go?" he asked immediately. "Better than expected," she said. "They gave me 30 days to make the version 2 case." A pause. "And after 30 days, we'll see," she said. But she said it the way she said most things now, not with the uncertainty of someone who doesn't know, but with the patience of someone who does, and is simply allowing the sequence to happen in its correct order. "There's something else," Daniel said. His voice had shifted slightly, the careful shift of a man who has news he is deciding how to deliver. "Nathan's attorney called this morning." She stopped walking. "About what?" "Not about the settlement. The settlement is done." Another pause. "About Claire." She started walking again slower. "What about her?" "She's retained an attorney," Daniel said. "She's not coming after you, nothing like that. This is going to sound unexpected." "Tell me." "She's filed a complaint with the company's HR department against Nathan. She's claiming that her position as director of communications was contingent on the personal relationship, and that when the relationship began, when he pursued it, there was an existing power dynamic that she wasn't fully equipped to navigate at the time." Olivia stopped again. The sidewalk was busy around her. People moving in both directions, carrying coffees, talking into phones, doing the ordinary things of an ordinary Wednesday in Boston. She stood in the middle of it and processed what Daniel had just told her. "Is she saying he coerced her?" Olivia said carefully. "She's saying the relationship was initiated by him, that she was 28 and relatively new to the company, that he was the CEO, and that the power differential was real, even if the choices were hers." A pause. "Her attorney is being very precise about the language. They're not alleging assault. They're alleging that the professional environment enabled a relationship that compromised her professional standing, and that her termination following the divorce proceedings was retaliatory." Olivia stood very still. She thought about Claire in the courtroom, the laugh, the pointed finger, the 2 words mouthed across the aisle. She thought about the text message, "I'm sorry. I didn't know the real story. I should have asked." She thought about Nathan's kitchen, which had been her kitchen, and a 28-year-old communications director who had been handed a story about a brilliant visionary CEO and had believed it the way people believe stories that are told by people with authority. She thought about what it means to be given the wrong map by someone who is supposed to know where you're going. "Is the complaint against Nathan personally or against the company?" she said. "Both," Daniel said, "which means it's now a matter the board is going to need to address as majority shareholder." "I know," she said. "I know." She started walking again. "Daniel, I'm not going to interfere with an HR process. Whatever Claire's filing, that goes through proper channels. I'm not going to make it go away, and I'm not going to accelerate it. The process exists for a reason." "Understood," he said. "I just needed you to know." "I know," she said. "Thank you." She hung up. She walked 2 blocks in the direction of the parking garage, and then she stopped and sat down on a bench outside a coffee shop and just breathed for a moment. Because here was the thing about Claire Morgan, that Olivia had been working out slowly over the past 3 weeks since that text message she hadn't answered. Claire had not been a good person to her. That was true. The 18 months of public performance, the laughter in the courtroom, the contempt, the collusion in a deception that had cost Olivia her marriage and nearly cost her her company. None of that was a small thing, and she was not going to pretend it was. But she had also spent 16 years with Nathan Bennett. She knew how he worked. She knew the particular quality of his charm when he wanted something. She knew how he told stories, the ones that were true, the ones that were enhanced, and the ones that were simply the version of events that served him best, told so consistently that he had stopped knowing the difference. She thought about a 28-year-old woman being charmed by that. She thought about the specific kind of story Nathan would have told Claire about Olivia, the quiet wife, the woman who had stepped back, the person who wasn't really involved anymore. She thought about how convincing that story would have been coming from him and his voice, with his certainty behind it. She didn't excuse Claire, but she understood something she hadn't wanted to understand before, which was that they had both been in the same story playing different roles, and neither of them had written it. She sat on that bench for 10 minutes. Then she got up, went to the parking garage, got in her car, and drove to her son's school. She sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes before the bell rang. When Marcus came out, he did the thing again, not looking for her, while looking for her, finding the car, the slight shift. He got in and put his bag in the back and looked at her. "You okay?" he said. He said it the way teenagers say it when they actually mean it, without the ironic distance they use for most things. "I think so," she said. "I had a big morning. The board thing. How'd it go?" She thought about how to answer that. "I think I remembered something," she said. He looked at her. "What?" "That I'm actually good at this," she said. "That I know what I'm doing. That somewhere in the last 15 years I started, I don't know, deferring, minimizing, telling myself it was fine to let other people take up the space." She looked at him. "I was good at it before I was your mom. I'm still good at it. I just got out of practice saying so." I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sophia, the girl in my English class I told you about, the one who corrects your pronunciation. Yeah, she gave a presentation last week about her science project, and it was really good, like objectively good. And at the end, the teacher asked her who helped her with it, and she immediately said her dad." He paused. "And I watched her do that, and I thought her dad didn't do that project. She did. I watched her work on it in the library for 3 weeks. He looked at the dashboard. "Why do people do that?" Olivia looked at her son, 14 years old, watching the world with the particular attention of someone who was going to understand it better than most people if she could just keep him paying attention. "Because it can feel safer," she said, "to give the credit away, because then if it fails, it wasn't really yours, and if it succeeds, you don't have to defend it." She paused. "It's not a good reason, but it's the real one." He thought about this. Are you going to stop doing that?" "Yes," she said, "I am." He nodded, like that was the answer he expected, and he was satisfied with it, and the conversation was complete. "Can we stop for food? I have practice at 4, but I'm starving." She laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of her, the kind that arrives before you decide to let it. "Yes," she said, "we can stop for food." The 30 days moved the way. Consequential time moves both faster than expected and more densely packed than any equivalent period before it. Olivia worked. Not the kind of working she had done for 15 years, the background process working the notebook, in the evening working the thinking she did in the margins of other people's demands on her time. She worked the way she had worked before Marcus, before the company launched, before she had decided that the needs of the family required her to put her own work second. She worked like she was solving a problem that mattered, because she was. She brought in 2 engineers she had worked with early in her career, people who had known her before she was Nathan Bennett's wife, and who had followed her work from a distance, and who, when she called them, said yes before she had finished explaining what she was asking. She set up in the spare bedroom of the apartment she had moved into after the house sold, and she worked from 7 in the morning until Marcus texted her that he was home from school, and then she was his mother for 3 hours, and then she worked again. She called Judith twice with questions about company infrastructure. She had one conversation with the current CTO, a man named James Park, who was good at his job and also deeply practical, and who had been aware for 3 years that the platform's architecture was aging in ways that needed addressing and had lacked the organizational support to push for change. He and Olivia talked for 4 hours the first time they met. At the end of it, he looked at her notes and said, "This should have happened 2 years ago." "I know," she said. "Let's make it happen now." The version 2 proposal she presented to the board at the end of the 30 days was 42 pages. She presented for 90 minutes. She answered questions for another 40. At the end, Robert Chu looked at Thomas Ellis, and Thomas Ellis looked at Sandra Park, and Judith looked at Olivia, and the room had the quality of a held breath. Thomas Ellis spoke first. "I'm withdrawing my support for the external search," he said. It cost him something to say it, she could see that. He was a man who changed positions reluctantly and always felt the cost of it. "The technical leadership argument is correct. We can't afford a learning curve right now." Sandra Park nodded. Robert Chu looked at Olivia and said, "What do you need from us?" "A decision," she said, "clear and clean. Not a committee, not a search firm. A decision about who is leading this company through the next 3 years." Another held breath. Judith said, "The board would like to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer of Bennett Health Innovations, effective upon Nathan's departure at the end of the transition period." She paused. "Subject to your acceptance." The room waited. Olivia looked at the table in front of her. The 42-page proposal, 3 months of work distilled into something she could defend in any room to any person at any level of scrutiny. She thought about the kitchen 15 years ago. She thought about the first time she had explained the algorithm to Nathan and watched his face light up with the particular excitement of a man who has just been handed something he knows is valuable. She thought about writing version 2 in a notebook at 1 in the morning while her cat slept beside her. She thought about Marcus asking, "Are you going to stop doing that?" She looked up. "Yes," she said, "subject to one condition." Judith raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "The founding history of this company is corrected in all official materials. The website, the company filings, the press kit. Whatever describes how this company began, it is corrected to reflect the actual history." She looked around the table. "Not for my ego, because it's true, and this company is going to be built on true things going forward." No one spoke for a moment. Then Judith said, "Agreed." And that was how Olivia Bennett became the CEO of the company she had always owned. The news broke on a Thursday afternoon 5 weeks after the settlement. A press release joint from the board, and the new CEO went out at 3 o'clock. By 4, the trades had picked it up. By 6, it was on the front page of 3 major business publications. By the following morning, it had reached the general press. The headline that ran most widely was not the one the PR team had drafted. It was from a journalist who had done her own research, and it read, "The woman who built Bennett Health is taking it back." Olivia read it at her kitchen table in the apartment. Marcus was at school. Newton was on the counter doing the thing cats do, where they sit in the one spot designated as off-limits, because that is the interesting spot. She read it once. Then she closed her laptop, picked up her coffee, and went to her desk. She had work to do. Somewhere across the city, in a different apartment. Nathan Bennett read the same headline on his phone. He sat with it for a long time. He thought about 16 years. He thought about what he had said to Olivia in the conference room that he had always known, and how much it had cost him to say it out loud, and how strange it was that the saying of it had been the first honest thing he had done in years. He thought about the Tuesday night in the kitchen, the coffee he had refilled without being asked, the problem she had been close to solving. He put his phone face down on the table. And in a different part of the city, Claire Morgan read the headline on her own phone. She read the article. She read about the patents. She read about the version 2 proposal. She read the line near the end where the journalist quoted a source close to the board saying that the new CEO's grasp of the technology was unlike anything the board had encountered in 15 years of meetings. She put her phone down. She thought about the text she had sent 3 weeks ago that had never been answered. She thought some things don't get answered, and maybe that was fair. She thought about what she was going to do next with her own life, which was a question she had been avoiding because the answer required her to be honest about choices she had made, and honesty about choices is the hardest kind. But she was going to have to get there eventually. She was 31 years old. She had time to get there. And in the spare bedroom of an apartment in Brookline that was already starting to feel like hers, Olivia Bennett opened her notebook to the page where she had written the question that started everything. What does version 2 look like? Beneath it now, 42 pages of answer. And beneath that already the beginning of the next question. Because that was the thing about real work. It didn't end with the answer. It ended with the next question. And she had never been afraid of questions. The first morning, Olivia walked into Bennett Health Innovations as CEO. She was 12 minutes early. Not because she was anxious, because she had always been 12 minutes early to everything that mattered, a habit so deeply ingrained that Marcus had once told her it was her most predictable quality, which he said as a criticism, and she had received as a compliment. The lobby receptionist, the same young woman from the Monday board meeting, looked up when she came through the door, and this time there was no uncertainty in her expression. She had been briefed. The whole building had been briefed. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett," she said. "Good morning," Olivia said. "What's your name?" The young woman blinked. "Alicia." "Good morning, Alicia," Olivia said. "I'll be doing a walkthrough of each floor this week. Not inspections, just introductions. I want to know who's here." Alicia looked like she hadn't expected that. "Of course," she said. "I'll let the floor managers know." "Thank you." Olivia took the elevator to the 6th floor, the executive floor, and walked to the office at the end of the hallway that had been Nathan's for 15 years. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Someone had already moved his things out. The room was clean, neutral waiting. She walked in and sat down at the desk. She did not feel triumphant. She had thought she might have worried even that the feeling would be too large, that it would be about Nathan, about the courtroom, about everything that had brought her here. But sitting in that chair in that room, looking at the window and the city beyond it, what she felt was simpler and more durable than triumph. She felt at work. She put her briefcase on the desk, opened her notebook to the current page, and started her day. By 9 o'clock, James Park, the CTO, was at her door. He was a compact, precise man in his early 40s who had the quality of someone who had spent years being the smartest person in certain rooms and had learned to be quiet about it because the loudest person in the room was usually someone else. He knocked on the open door and held up 2 coffee cups. "I didn't know how you took it," he said, "so I got one black and one with everything." "Black," she said. "Thank you." He came in, sat across from her, and they looked at each other for a moment, with the particular recognition of 2 people who have been working in adjacent spaces without actually working together. "I read your full technical proposal," he said. "Not just the board summary, the whole thing." "And," she said. "And there are 2 places where I think you're underestimating the infrastructure lift," he said. "But the core architecture logic is correct, and I've been saying internally for 2 years that we need to move in this direction." He paused. Nobody was ready to hear it. "I'm ready to hear it," she said. "Show me the 2 places." He put down his coffee and opened his laptop. They worked for 2 hours. By the time they surfaced, they had identified the scope of the infrastructure challenge, roughed out a revised timeline, and agreed on the first 3 hires they needed to make. James left with a list and a look on his face that Olivia recognized the particular expression of a person who has just realized they are going to be allowed to do their actual job. She had worn that expression herself once. She intended to put it back on everyone in this building who deserved it. At 11, she had her first call with a hospital network CEO, Massachusetts General's chief operating officer, a woman named Dr. Patricia Connors, who had been a Bennett Health client for 7 years, and who had Olivia knew from the client files submitted 3 separate requests in the past 2 years for capabilities the current platform didn't provide. "Dr. Connors," Olivia said, "my name is Olivia Bennett. I'm the new CEO of Bennett Health Innovations. I'm calling because I've read your last 3 enhancement requests, and I want to tell you that we're building what you asked for." A silence on the line. "I'm sorry," Dr. Connors said. "The predictive staffing integration with real-time patient acuity scoring," Olivia said. "The supply chain exception flagging, the cross-departmental resource reallocation modeling. All 3. They're in our version 2 development plan. I wanted to call our most tenured clients directly before we make any public announcements because you've been patient with us for a long time and you deserve to hear it from me first." Another silence. Longer this time. "Ms. Bennett," Dr. Connors said slowly, "I have to tell you I came very close to issuing an RFP to your competitors last quarter. We've been waiting on those capabilities for 2 years. "I know," Olivia said. "That shouldn't have happened. I'm sorry it did. I can't change the past 2 years, but I can tell you what the next 18 months look like if you give us the chance." "Tell me," Dr. Connors said, Olivia told her, "specifically with numbers, with timelines, with the particular confidence that is not bravado, but simply competence speaking clearly." By the end of the call, Dr. Connors had agreed to participate in the version 2 beta program and had said almost to herself near the end, "I don't know why it took this long to get you on the phone." Neither do I, Olivia said. It won't take this long again. She hung up and sat for a moment, and then she called the next client on the list. That was the first day. They were all like that. Somewhere during those first weeks, the building began to change. Not physically, the floors and the walls and the steel logo in the lobby were the same, but the quality of attention in the company shifted. People who had been waiting for permission to say the things they knew started saying them. James Park held a full engineering team meeting in the second week, and Olivia attended and listened for 3 hours to a group of people who had a great deal to say, now that someone was listening, and she took notes, real ones, and 2 days later sent a memo responding to every point raised specifically, which prompted the senior engineer who had organized the meeting to come to her office and stand in the doorway and say, "I've been here 8 years. That memo was the first time a senior executive has ever directly responded to anything I said in a meeting." "That's going to change," she said. "I can see that," he said. "I just wanted to say we're all watching, and we're in." She looked at him. "What's your name?" "David Chen." "David," she said, "tell me the 3 things you'd fix first if you could fix anything." He told her. She wrote them down. 2 of them were already on her list. The third was something she hadn't thought of, and she told him so. And the look on his face when she said that, the specific quality of a person being seen accurately, was worth more than any quarterly report. The press continued its coverage. Olivia did not read most of it, which was a deliberate choice. Not from avoidance, but from focus. She knew the story she was building, and she did not need to watch other people describe it to understand it. She gave one interview to a journalist named Rachel Kim, who had done the original headline, "The Woman Who Built Bennett Health is Taking It Back," and who had, Olivia had learned, spent 3 weeks researching the technical history of the company before she wrote a word. They met at a coffee shop near the office. Not a PR event, not a formal sit-down. Just 2 women at a table, one asking questions and one answering them. "Tell me about the original algorithm," Rachel said. And Olivia told her. All of it. The Cambridge apartment, the notebooks, the Tuesday night, the problem that broke open at 5 in the morning while Nathan was asleep. She told it the way it happened, without editing, without performing modesty, without the particular female reflex of softening your own competence to make it easier for other people to receive. She told it clearly because it was true, and because she had spent enough years not telling it. Rachel listened with the complete attention of someone who understands she is hearing the real version of something. "Why did you let the other version persist for so long?" she asked. Olivia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Because it was easier," she said, "and because I believed for a long time, genuinely believed that it didn't matter, that the company being successful was enough, that the work speaking for itself was enough." She paused. "But the work doesn't speak for itself. People do, and I stopped speaking." "What made you start again?" "He stopped seeing me," she said. "And I realized I had helped him do it. I had made myself so quiet, so contained, so deliberately not taking up space, that when he looked in my direction there was nothing there to see. I had erased myself from my own story." She looked at Rachel directly. "I'm not doing that again." The interview ran the following Tuesday. It was long, 4,000 words, which was rare for that publication, and it was from the opening paragraph, not the story of a wife reclaiming what was hers. It was the story of an engineer and the thing she built. The patents were in it, the algorithm was in it, the Tuesday night was in it. The courtroom was in it, but it was not the center. The center was the work. The response was significant. Emails to the company's general address went from a typical 30 or so per day to 412 by the Wednesday after the article ran. A third of them were from women in technology and healthcare who wanted to say something specifically to Olivia, women who recognized the contours of the story, who had their own versions of it, who had been quiet in rooms where they should have been loud and were either still being quiet or had recently stopped. She read every one of them. She didn't have time to respond to all of them, but she read them because they were real, and real things deserved to be read. One of them was from a 26-year-old engineer named Maya Torres, who was 3 years into her first serious job at a healthcare startup in Chicago, and who had, she wrote, been told by her manager that she communicated too technically in meetings and needed to soften her delivery. Maya had spent 2 months trying to figure out how to be less herself in a professional setting. And then she had read the article, and she wrote to Olivia with the directness of someone who has nothing to lose. "I want to build something real. I don't want to build it quietly. How do you do both? Olivia read that email at 10 at night, sitting at her desk after everyone else had gone home, and she wrote back. She wrote, "You build the thing first. You build it so well that the work is undeniable, and then you put your name on it. Loudly, clearly, without apology. Not because you need the credit, because it's true." She sent it and closed her laptop. 2 floors below her, the engineering team's version. 2 Development Server was running its first real test suite. James Park had sent her a message at 9:15, "First results are promising." She had sent back, "Tell me tomorrow. Right now, go home." He had sent a laugh emoji, which she had not expected from James Park, and which made her realize that she had not yet heard him laugh out loud, and that she was going to fix that. She packed her briefcase and rode the elevator down. In the lobby, Alicia was doing a handoff with the evening receptionist, a man named George who had been at the front desk for 11 years, and who Olivia had learned in her first week walkthrough, knew every person in the building by name and remembered their coffee orders, and had never once been asked by Nathan Bennett what his name was. "Good night, George," she said. He looked up, and the particular quality of his surprise was something she would not forget. "Good night, Ms. Bennett." She pushed through the lobby door. Nathan was standing on the sidewalk outside. She stopped. I was not blocking her path. He was standing to the side with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the particular posture of someone who has been standing in one place, working up to something for longer than was comfortable. He looked like himself, the good suit, the careful hair, but there was something about him that had settled, or maybe it was something that had loosened some tension she had been so accustomed to that she had stopped seeing it, and now that it was gone, she could see its absence. "I'm not here to cause a problem," he said immediately. "I can see that," she said. She did not move toward him or away. "What are you here for?" He exhaled. "I wanted to see it," he said. "The building, with you in it." He looked up at the facade. "I drove by 3 times before I stopped." She looked at him. And it looks right," he said. His voice was low and had the quality of something being said that has been resisted for a long time. "It looks the way it should have looked a long time ago." She was quiet for a moment. The evening traffic moved around them. Someone on the street behind her was laughing at something on their phone. The city was doing what cities do, indifferent and constant. "Nathan," she said, "what are you going to do?" He looked at her. "I have some options," he said. "A friend in Denver is building something early stage. He wants an operator, someone who knows how to build client relationships, build a team, build the sales infrastructure." He paused. "Not a technical founder, just the other part." "The part you're actually good at," she said, not cruelly, accurately. He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his face, but it was close. "Yeah," he said, "the part I'm actually good at." "That sounds right," she said. "Does it—" He looked at her with the genuine uncertainty of a man who has lost the scaffolding he used to orient himself and is still learning to stand without it. "Because I've spent a lot of the past 3 months not being sure what I'm good at. It turns out when you've been telling yourself a story for 15 years, when you stop telling it, you have to figure out what's left." "What's left," she said, "is what was always true. You are excellent with people, Nathan. You always were. You can walk into a room and make people want to be on your side. That's a real skill. It was real when we founded this company, and it's still real now." She held his gaze. "You just needed it to be enough, and it wasn't for you, so you made it into something bigger." He looked at her for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know I said it in the conference room through the attorneys in all the formal ways. I'm saying it now outside without anyone watching. I'm sorry." She looked at him. This man she had loved for 16 years, this man who had refilled her coffee in the dark and had also slowly, invisibly taken credit for what she poured into it, and she felt the last piece of something she had been carrying set down. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet or not entirely, and she was not going to lie about that. But something adjacent to it. The recognition that the man in front of her was real and flawed and had done something genuinely wrong and was standing on a sidewalk in October trying to say so. "I know," she said. "Go build something you can be honest about." He nodded. She walked to her car. She did not look back. Marcus was awake when she got home, which was unusual for a Thursday night. He was at the kitchen table with his laptop and his history textbook and the specific chaos of a teenager who has been trying to study and has mostly been looking at other things online. "You're late," he said. I know, she said. Big day. I saw the article, he said. The one from Tuesday. Someone shared it in the school group chat. He looked at her. Someone tagged me and said your mom is kind of a badass. She set down her briefcase. What did you say? I said, yeah, he said. Obviously. She looked at her son, 14 years old, and already she could see the person he was going to be, the directness, the attention, the instinct for what was true. She thought about what she was building, not just in the office, not just in the servers running their test suites 2 miles away, but here, in this kitchen, in this boy. Come here, she said. He came around the table and she put her arms around him, the way she had when he was small, and he let her, which he sometimes didn't anymore. And she held on for a moment to the particular solidness of him, the proof that she had also built this, that this was also something she had made with her own hands. I love you, she said. I know, he said. You're squishing me. She let go. I went back to his homework. She made tea, and the ordinary evening went on around them the way evenings do, and underneath the ordinary surface of it, everything was different from how it had been a year ago in ways that were still becoming clear. 6 months later, the version 2 platform launched its beta program. 11 hospital networks, 317 beds worth of real-time testing. The predictive accuracy in the first month of deployment exceeded the projections by 14%, which was the kind of number that makes clients call their peers and their peers call you. Olivia was in a meeting with James Park and the 2 engineers they had hired out of MIT when the call came in from Dr. Patricia Connors at Massachusetts General. She stepped out into the hallway to take it. I need to tell you something, Dr. Connors said. Tell me, Olivia said. I've been in healthcare operations for 23 years, Dr. Connors said. I have used 6 different predictive analytics platforms. Some of them were good, some of them were adequate. A pause. What you have built is different. I had my team run a full comparison against our manual projections from last quarter, and the version 2 system caught a resource gap 3 days earlier than our most experienced analyst. 3 days. In hospital operations, that's the difference between a crisis and a managed situation. Another pause waited with something. I need you to understand what that means. There are patients whose outcomes will be better because of what you built. Olivia stood in the hallway very still. She thought about the Tuesday night in the Cambridge apartment. She thought about what the problem had originally been, the thing she had been trying to solve at 2 a.m. while Nathan slept. A hospital system in the news for a resource crisis that had been preventable. A data problem she had thought reading about it. If the data had been used correctly, this wouldn't have happened. She had been trying to solve that. 15 years ago in the kitchen, she had been trying to prevent what Dr. Connors was describing, the gap, the crisis, the avoidable harm. She had been trying to protect patients she would never meet. Thank you for telling me, she said. Her voice was steady. That's why we built it. I know, Dr. Connors said. I just wanted to make sure you knew it was working. She went back into the meeting room. James looked at her face and said, Good call. Very good call, she said. Let's keep going. The full platform launched publicly 8 months later. The press covered it as a technology story, which it was. They covered it as a business story, which it also was. And some of them, the ones who had followed the whole arc of it from the courtroom to the board meeting to the article to the launch, covered it as the other story too. The one about who builds things and who gets to say so. A journalist, Olivia didn't know, wrote a piece that opened with the question, what would the healthcare technology industry look like if we had listened to the people who built it from the beginning? She read it on her phone on a Sunday morning. Newton on her lap, Marcus still asleep down the hall. She read to the end. The last paragraph described her as the architect of one of the most significant healthcare AI platforms in the country. Not Nathan Bennett's ex-wife. Not the woman who had won the divorce. The architect. She set her phone down. She had one more call to make that she had been putting off for 6 weeks. She made it now on a Sunday morning because she had learned that the things you put off rarely become easier with time. The phone rang twice. Hello? Claire Morgan's voice was careful, guarded in the way of someone who has been reconstructing things for a long time and is not sure what territory she is in. Claire, Olivia said. It's Olivia Bennett. A silence, long enough that Olivia could hear her breathing change. I'm not calling about the HR process, Olivia said immediately. That's running through proper channels and I'm not involved in it. I'm calling because—" She stopped for a moment, finding the honest reason refusing the easier one. "Because I read what you said in your filing about being 28 and being given a story by someone with authority over you, and I thought about it for a long time." She paused. "I didn't call to forgive you. I called because I think you know the difference between what you did to me and what was done to you, and I think you're going to have to make peace with both of those things, and that's hard work, and it's yours to do. But I wanted you to know that I see both things. I see what you chose, and I see what you were handed." The silence on the other end was long. "I don't know what to say," Claire said. Her voice was very quiet, not the practiced voice of the woman who had laughed in the courtroom. Something underneath that. "You don't have to say anything," Olivia said. "I just wanted you to know." She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment, and then she put it down and she picked up her notebook, the good one, the one she used for real thinking, and she turned to a new page, and at the top she wrote a question the way she always began. Newton stretched across her lap and resettled. Down the hall she heard Marcus moving the particular sounds of a teenager, waking up a thud, a shuffle, the muffled complaint of someone confronted with mourning before they were ready for it. "Mom," he called. "Kitchen," she called back. "Is there coffee?" "There will be." She got up to make it notebook tucked under her arm, the new question already unfolding in the back of her mind, the way questions did when they were real ones, not urgent, not anxious, but steady and alive, the kind that pull you forward. This was what 15 years of silence had not been able to take from her, the part of her that looked at a problem and felt underneath everything the particular pull of wanting to solve it, the part that woke up early because there was something worth waking up for, the part that had written algorithms in the dark while the world slept and had never not once doubted that the problem was worth the effort. That part had never left. She had just stopped letting other people see it. And the thing about being seen, the real thing, the thing she had learned in a courtroom and a boardroom and 100 conversations since, is that it begins with you. With the willingness to stand in the room and say, "I built this. I know what I'm doing. This is mine." She poured the coffee. Marcus came in still half asleep and sat down at the table, and she put a cup in front of him, even though he was probably too young for coffee, and they both knew it, and neither of them said anything about it. She sat across from him and opened her notebook. "What are you working on?" he asked. "The next version," she said. He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "Of the platform. Of everything," she said. He nodded like that was a completely reasonable answer. And she picked up her pen and she started. Because Olivia Bennett had never needed anyone's permission to begin. She had only needed for a long time to remember that, and now she remembered, and she was never going to forget again.